The compassion of the contemporary therapeutic establishment has stunted the development of countless people. Okay, hold up, maybe that is a bit extreme. However, I don't think it's as far off the mark as you'd like to think. A common criticism from within psychology is that we define mental health as a mere absence of negative symptoms, or as adjustment to normality, whatever that is supposed to mean. The basic simplified idea is that we've often made the goal of treatment to primarily be getting rid of pain. So in this essay, I'll be offering an alternative called Dabrowski's theory of positive disintegration, or the idea that emotional pain may not actually be a bad thing in all cases. Now, to many of you watching, this may seem very counterintuitive. If someone is experiencing anxiety, depression, intense shame, or simply feels stuck in life, wouldn't the goal be to get rid of all of that pain? In many ways, yes. So I want to be clear that this video is not a low nuanced attack on therapy or medications. I want to make that very, very clear. Both of these approaches have helped a lot of people dealing with a lot of pain. However, in too many cases, this getting rid of pain approach can actually prevent people from making the development they need. This is especially true when we consider how therapeutic concepts get simplified and distorted within popular consciousness. For example, think about the consequences when we say that any mental suffering is some sort of illness that needs to be cured. This implies that there's nothing wrong with the character of the person who is experiencing this pain. It implies that mental illness works like a physical disease, where they've been infected by the cold of depression, or perhaps they lost the genetic lottery and they were simply born with depression or anxiety. In either case, the assumption is that they are a passive recipient of mental suffering, and that all they need to do is take a pill to make them normal again, which obviously means not feeling any sort of pain. The issue is that in our attempts to be compassionate and to help people through their very real pain, we may have actually disempowered them. Even my implying before that there might be something wrong with mentally ill people's character may have raised alarm bells for you. It sounds like I'm blaming people who are the victims of a disease. Therapy often tries to help clients see that they aren't to blame and that there isn't something wrong with them. I appreciate these goals very much, but according to Dabrowski, sometimes all of this pain isn't a sign that they have an illness or bad genetics. Instead, he believed that much of what we call mental illness is actually a positive sign of growth. By making our goal getting rid of pain, we have unintentionally removed the means by which people grow. Now, this essay may be a bit technical, so I've included the 5 primary terms in the top comment below. Very short description just for you to quickly remind yourself of. Also, as a very brief aside for people who know the 2 developmental models I'm discussing here, I have a note at the bottom of the Substack version of this essay that explains my alignment of these 2 models in greater detail. If you're new to this, just ignore that, it's not relevant. This will likely become clearer as we discuss this in the future. Either way, to get a hold of Dabrowski's ideas, the first thing you need to understand is his idea that people move through levels of increasing individuality. It's kind of like you're a video game character where each level gives you more skills. At level 1, or conformist, we find about 50% of the population. To be conformist kind of means that they sacrifice their individuality in the name of their group. Their group comes first. To be clear though, they don't do this because they choose to, but almost because they have to. Even me saying that they have an individuality to sacrifice is kind of giving them too much in a way. Who they are as a person is intimately bound to their group. They aren't so much their own person, but are a Christian, are a conservative, are even a feminist or atheist. The point is that they think this is what my group is like, and that is exactly who I am and must be. If you've watched my playlist, The Psycho-Spiritual Prison, then you know the structure of the external compass we as men are given by our culture. We use this compass to guide us through our lives and to help us make decisions. And all we're really after is approval that we're a good member of our group. Remember, this is who we are, and so we need our group to validate, yes, that is who you are. You are one of us. We also assume that this compass guides us to the normal, natural, and moral way of things. Dr. William Tillier describes people at this level as the average person, where behavior is controlled by the external forces of socialization. As you can imagine, nonconformity can be quite painful to the conformist. If you literally believe that the way you think about the world is the only good way to think about the world, then the moment you're forced to think differently, you automatically assume you are doing something wrong. Connect that with what I said before, that many people who enter therapy have to be taught that there isn't something wrong with them. How many people who come to therapy are there not because they have a mental disease, but because they've been confronted with the pain of nonconformity? This is level 2, called uni-level disintegration. I'll explain what that means in a moment. But Dr. William Tillier says that the prominent features of this level are initial, brief, and often intense crises, where the security of day-to-day adjustment breaks down. The general idea at level 2 is that the person is experiencing an increase in pain and confusion, but they don't necessarily know why and often blame the environment. Remember, they've been living their typical life, never really having any reason to question their culture or way of thinking, and then suddenly they're confronted with a situation in the environment that shatters or disintegrates their ideas of the typical life. It's a positive disintegration. It can be positive, as we'll see, but it's still a disintegration. It can be very painful. For example, think about what something like a breakup implies for someone who defines themselves purely based on their group. As a level 1 conformist, they are bound to their role as boyfriend because that is who they are. A breakup is an emotionally violent othering. We saw ourselves as being one with the relationship, only to be confronted with the reality that we're an outsider. Our group, tightly knit by romance, affection, and shared memories, has been shown to be a false reality. The person we loved and who loved us, who completed us, is now shown to be a stranger, and that means we are a stranger to ourselves. At level 2, we become self-conscious, or conscious of ourselves as separate from our group. I am not her boyfriend anymore. This same process may also begin by going to university, where you're confronted with a new situation that is very different from your family home or high school. In whatever form it takes, the nonconformity we face requires a new way of thinking that we cannot yet really put a name to, but that begins to fray the edges of our worldview. Dr. Cook-Reuter says that the self-conscious want to be accepted by others because of how they are different and special. So at level 2, there's this weird stance where you want to be your own person, but in a way that earns approval from your group. Cook-Reuter says that they need this because they cannot yet prioritize among options, and so they often depend on the newest procedure that offers the best solution. Cook-Reuter says that they need this because they cannot yet prioritize among options, and so they often depend on the newest procedure that offers the best solution. They understand what's expected of them by the group, so they're looking to be the best at fulfilling that expectation. The major point about being self-conscious, or level 2, is this idea of being uni-level or one-leveled. Again, they can't prioritize to say one value or goal is better than another. The inner conflict that emerges with self-consciousness doesn't fundamentally change their view of reality, and so their goals are still determined largely by the external compass of their culture. They do what the experts tell them to do. They straddle this weird halfway point where they're almost conformists, but not quite. You want to become the most special of the conformists, in a way. If you remember from my video on Acedia, one of the ways in which we have meaning in life is through coherence, or through the world and our place in that world making sense. When you've begun to disintegrate, but the world is still on the same level, there's no real sense of direction. To be uni-level, again, one-leveled, means that there's no place to go away from where you currently are. Maybe that means finding a new relationship and telling yourself that this one will finally complete you. Or perhaps it means becoming the best boyfriend she's ever had, bending over backwards so that she won't leave you and you won't be forced into self-consciousness again. This is why the uni-level disintegration of the self-conscious can often be short-lived. If things are very painful, things are incoherent and don't make sense, and you don't have a solid enough sense of direction, then there's a need to escape from the new freedom you found. Cook Reuter says that they can put on a front where they act as if they know more, as if they have it all figured out. Maybe they even convince themselves that they do. The point is that they have to deny that there is a problem in order to find some stability. However, I think there is a very real problem. David Chapman has said that now more than in the recent past, people are having difficulty moving away from conformity. So let's try to connect some dots here. Firstly, no matter what your beliefs are, I think most of us can agree that our society is pretty unstable right now. In the Psycho-Spiritual Prison series, I argue that our external compass of masculinity has become more reactionary because we're often caught between the vicious fighting of traditional masculinity and progressive masculinity. The connection I'm trying to make here then is that our entire cultural moment occupies that weird stance of uni-level disintegration. Personally, I tend to be on the left. And so even as a Canadian, the recent election of Donald Trump genuinely worries me. We feel pressured to conform to our group because we feel under attack by Republicans completely controlling the government. There's this pull to come together and to figure out how we can defend against this. And obviously, the right feels the same way. Political polarization has basically created a very harsh us versus them. All of that means that everyone's conformity is constantly being attacked by a non-conformity, by some other vision of morality that threatens to fray the borders of our worldview. Traditional masculinity versus progressive masculinity. The war between them keeps either pushing into their own conformity while simultaneously being pushed into disintegration by the continual confrontation with nonconformity. Then, like I said at the beginning of this essay, we have this idea of mental health where the goal is getting rid of the pain. Each of us is being pulled apart so that everything we could possibly do just makes us feel what we've been told is mental illness. It's a disease, an illness, and the cure is getting rid of the pain. Furthermore, in our society, we have easy access to so much pleasure. We have porn, drugs, video games, binge watching Netflix, doom scrolling, scrolling through endless feeds on TikTok, being exposed to beautiful lifestyle after beautiful lifestyle that is far better than our own. All of these working together to numb us to our world and self disintegrating around us. We're locked, culturally and individually, in that weird stance of uni-level disintegration, where we're too self-conscious to be a conformist, and yet we're not really a true individual because our group is in constant threat from the outside. Our only way to deal with the pain of this radical incoherence and nihilism is through numbing ourselves to it, because that reduces the pain, even if temporarily, and that is what mental health is supposed to be, right? So what's the solution here? Dabrowski says that the cure for mental suffering is not to get rid of the pain, but to make use of the pain. This brings us to level 3, or spontaneous multi-level disintegration. Yes, I know, another term, but just think about the words in the term, okay? If uni-level is one-leveled, where things are as they've always been, multi-level is where we make a distinction between the way things are and the way things could be. At level 3 then, there's now a hierarchy where we can begin to prioritize of our own accord, based on our own thinking. Another skill that level 2 just didn't really have yet. It depended on its culture to make that priority for it. However, think about what multi-level implies. If things could be different, if things could be better than they are now, then that means things staying the same is a bad thing. With multi-levelness, my inner conflict becomes far more conscious. More importantly, I now feel this as being far more my responsibility than I did when I was uni level. There's a fundamental shift where we think, I thought I understood life, now I don't understand anything. Cook-Reuter calls level 3 conscientious and says it's where we really start to gain a capacity for authoring ourselves. A benefit of being very conscious of our inner conflict is that we can start making use of that inner conflict to make ourselves better. Remember, level 2 was self-conscious, meaning that they were conscious of being separate from the group. However, that just meant that they could desire to be the most special by the standards of the group. At level 3 conscientious, I can now turn inward and see how I could be different from who I currently am. So let's say you just had a breakup. You feel ashamed because you were acting so confident that she loved you, only to have her shove in your face that you were less than you thought you were. Perhaps she started dating soon after, and now you're feeling inadequate to the new guy. What does he have that you don't? Again, at level 2, you feel separate from the group, but you're likely just going to blame her. She wasn't really worth it. She was kind of a bitch, always nagging me. I'm better off without her, etc., etc. This may seem really immature, but relative to level 1, level 2 is doing better. Level 1 conformist would be desperate to get her back because his entire sense of self is dependent on being her boyfriend. Level 2 self-conscious has a hostility, but it's a functional hostility that helps them move away from the relationship. So level 1 might want to get back together, level 2 would be hostile toward his girlfriend, and level 3 conscientious would start to wonder, why am I not enough? Level 3 conscientious would start blaming himself, but that's what actually allows him to start working on himself. Maybe he starts going to the gym, maybe he starts reading books on how to be a better boyfriend, or to be more socially outgoing so he can meet a new girlfriend. Again, the point is that because level 3 can blame himself for not being enough, he can actually start becoming better at maybe even some of the same goals that the other levels had. They stay the same and try to pursue the same goals. Level 3 tries to get better and maybe pursues the same goals or pursues some altogether different goals. And yet, if the contemporary view of mental health is to love yourself and accept yourself just the way that you are, then there's no real way to say, no, I fucked up and I need to do better. I am to blame, I feel ashamed, I feel guilty, and I need to do something about that. I am not okay, I am not acceptable, but I can become more acceptable to myself. This is where level 3 really distinguishes itself from all the previous levels. Remember that a key point for understanding this entire theory is that we have to be able to make use of the pain. If it's too much for any of these levels, we can't make use of it because it overpowers us. Additionally, every human has the ability to feel bad, to feel ashamed, and to blame themselves. Of course they can. But the real thing that sets level 3 conscientious apart is that he can finally begin to make use of the pain toward his own goals and values. If you had blamed yourself before, you were trying to become more like what your culture expected of you. Now, you become more of what you expect of yourself. Dabrowski's theory is one of increasing individuality as you ascend the levels. However, level 3 still has its limitations. Cook-Reuter says that while the level 3 conscientious pursues one's own ideals and values, these are often the ones currently most salient in the cultural surround. Furthermore, Schlepie says some values remain the same as before, and some change drastically toward new self-chosen values. In other words, level 3 is starting to define their own values, but they can only really do this by picking through the values on offer, the values of their culture. Schlepie goes on to say that a therapist can thwart a person's developing personality and push them back toward level 2 and ultimately level 1. So let's connect those dots with an example. In my series on the psychospiritual prison, I make the point that a lot of the masculine tribes we're seeing pop up are because of men being a little bit above conformity. These tribes include red pill, no fap, men going their own way, and others. I think these men may actually be level 3, and this is what makes these tribes so dangerous. So, for example, let's say you're a guy who has just learned about nofap. This is the perfect example of what I mean by our culture keeping someone oscillating between level 1 and level 2. Your issues with porn are numbing you to the fact that you're lonely, in poor physical health, and you don't have much of anything to do other than video games or watching TV or porn. Then you find out about nofap and realize that this general feeling of malaise that comes over you every so often might be because of porn. So you try to quit. You fail. You try, you fail, you realize, oh my God, I'm addicted. I need to quit this thing. At that moment, you have moved past the oscillation between level 1 and level 2 and become multi-level. Now there's the porn-addicted self that you currently are, which is less than your ideal self, or the disciplined, sexually pure monk you think you have to be. Again, you're challenging the status quo that says, accept your sexuality, masturbation is healthy, watch as much porn as you want. Obviously, that's not completely bad. You should accept your sexuality. Masturbation in moderation can be fine, but that's then used to justify a relationship to porn that may be unhealthy, especially relative to the lack of experience with real-life partners and other healthy habits we would want this person to have. Now, you are getting control over your sexuality. You're going to the gym, you're meditating, all things that nofap advocates for. The multi-level between porn addict and monk is helping you become more level 3 conscientious. On top of that, nofap acts as a funnel into red pill that promises to answer your dating troubles that were caused by porn. You learn that we live in a gynocracy. Women seek high-value men, and you're given a system to become that high-value man who is the best man you could possibly be. I think this is a perfect example of what Schleppe means when a therapist might thwart someone's development and send them back to level 1 conformist. Obviously, nofap and red pill are not therapists, but they act as a substitute therapist, helping men take legitimate action in their lives. However, the way the ideology functions is to send them back downward to conformist. Not necessarily in the sense that they become exactly as they were, but in the sense that they become conformist to the red pill ideology itself. So they get sucked so deeply into red pill ideology that they can't question it, and they become bound to it, saying, this is what my group red pill is, and that is exactly the kind of man that I am. It's progress beyond the original status quo, but clearly locked back within conformity. You can see how multi-levelness, the ability to prioritize between different options, doesn't necessarily mean somebody is completely free. The fact that level 3 conscientious is still embedded in their culture means that their new capacity to choose their own values, to create their own internal compass, still isn't quite enough. They can turn the blame inward and convert it into responsibility. It's not a disempowering self-blame. Again, they can make use of that internal conflict. Unfortunately, while still within the bounds of their culture. In this case, in the very resentful ideology of red pill that gives them standards to achieve and a scapegoat to blame for everything else in the form of feminism. The fact that our cultural moment is so polarized means that there are more than enough opportunities to break the status quo by moving into an entirely different conformity. Different, but conformity all the same. So to prevent this kind of trap from happening requires we move to level 4, directed multi-level disintegration. As the name directed implies, at level 4 you gain much more control over your values and goals. The reason this is such a huge step is explained by Cook-Reuter, where she says that the level 4 individualist can stand outside the system they grew up in and observe themselves and their culture's assumptions, values, and beliefs. Now you're not just picking and choosing from the values on offer from your culture, but you're actually able to question the culture, question the status quo. You can say, yeah, maybe watching too much porn is unhealthy. I should probably put myself out there more and have some real experiences, but the whole red pill thing is making all these assumptions about how men are and how women are that probably have more to do with a patriarchal capitalist culture, for example, than their shoddy understanding of evolutionary psychology. So to use our breakup example, level 1 would be desperate to get back together or to find another relationship so that they can define themselves as boyfriend. Level 2 would experience a functional hostility, where he says, I never needed her anyway, because he now sees himself as separate from her, but he would likely still blame her. Level 2 may also sink back down to level 1, or he may find a role model, really cool guy like Andrew Tate and try to become exactly like him. Level 3, however, would make use of that blame and start to self-reflect, trying to figure out what they did wrong and how they can improve according to their own selection of the cultural values on offer. Level 4 would start questioning those cultural values, like perhaps questioning monogamy itself and considering polyamory. To be clear, this doesn't necessarily mean that level 4 would become polyamorous. The point is that they would be able to question fundamental cultural norms surrounding relationships according to their own values. Additionally, it's also possible that every level could do any of these things I just listed. It's just why they're doing it. If someone at level 2 found a role model who is polyamorous, then they might just become polyamorous. However, it's not because they're questioning cultural norms according to their own values, but because they were influenced by a charismatic enough role model. So I hope that distinction makes sense. It can be a bit difficult to fully wrap your mind around this stuff, so don't worry if it seems a bit confusing right now. Returning to the red pill example, you can now see how much the values of these masculine tribes are still embedded and defined by a certain cultural context. So to be clear, I know I'm picking on masculine tribes that tend to be more conservative. By nature of being progressive, progressive circles tend to challenge the status quo more often. However, like I've argued in previous videos, it's not just the group itself. If you're level 2, you're feeling the pressure of being removed from your group. And then, if you discover leftist politics, it's still possible that you go back down to level 1. At that point, you've now turned leftism into a new conformity. This is what a leftist is, and that is who I am. As the level 4 individualist, however, you're far better able to question the underlying assumptions of any group. You're never perfect, we're all human, and so it's not as if you suddenly become completely resistant to all super hostile us versus them tribal thinking. Again though, at level 4, this is much less likely to happen because you're far more defined by an internal compass that is more concerned with defining yourself based on your own inner reflection. If something happens, you become biased toward introspection, thinking your way through the situation, and a self-directed making sense of things. This could lead to an honoring of the individuality of others, or it could lead to hostility. It could. This in turn allows you to move to level 5, or autonomous. Cook-Greuter says, the crucial new capacity is to realize one's power to generate meaning and to tell a coherent self-story by creating it. Now, there's obviously so much more I could say about that, but my hopes that this would be a shorter video have not turned out as planned. And really, most of us are just not level 5 autonomous yet, myself included. The vast majority of you watching, just based on the statistics, are likely just level 2 or 3. It's not a bad thing, that's just where you currently are, and that's fine. I would be very surprised though if anyone level 1 is still watching. The way I've talked about conformity by relating it to conservatism and red pill, but also feminism, atheism, and leftist politics, means that I've unfortunately alienated every conformist. So again, I'm not trying to call anyone out. It doesn't matter what the group is, the values, the belief system, or whatever. It matters how the person engages with their group. And a conformist is, by definition, going to have difficulty hearing anything that might be negative about the way they engage with their group. They tend to assume that their group is perfect, so there couldn't be criticisms. So that's a good litmus test for yourself. Can you hear and consider constructive criticism of your group? If you can't without getting really triggered, that might be an indication that you want to stop and think through these issues a little bit more. Again, it's not to say that the criticism is correct. It could be very wrong, but a knee-jerk reaction against criticism can be an issue. So with that said, the 3 biggest takeaways I want you to get from this essay are: number 1, emotional pain and internal conflict aren't necessarily bad things. Number 2, you must have the capacity to channel that pain toward an ideal you actually care about. Learning to deal with emotional pain in healthy ways is one of the most important things. Not to get rid of the pain, but to grow with the pain. Future videos will get more into that, but you can already get a sense of how to do that. Meditation, for example, really good skill. Number 3, though, finally, write these levels down in a table with level 1 at the bottom and level 5 at the top, or whichever way you want. Understand these, get familiar with them. This video was just a superficial look at these, and in some ways I might have led you astray. If you simplify something, you're not getting the full complexity, the full depth. As a rough outline though, it will help you understand my videos so much better. Someone commented on my video, Why Myths Still Matter, that it was an incredibly gluing video that helped him understand all of my other videos. This is another very gluing video. Either way, that's more than enough for today. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Please hit the like button and subscribe for more conversations on masculinity, psychological development, and the cultivation of a personal mythology. Thanks again, and all the best to you on whatever journey you find yourself on.